I find one of the things that I struggle with the most when drawing pixel art is picking out the right colors. I feel like my art has been on a bit of a journey, and I've finally found a palette that works for me, at least for now. So in this video, we're going to take a trip down memory lane and talk about the different ways you could start picking out your colors for your next pixel art piece. Let's jump into it. Hey, my name is Jade, and I like to paint with pixels. When I was first starting out with pixel art, I was really intimidated by picking my own colors, so I reduced some of the overwhelm of starting to draw by using a pre-made color palette. I started with joining these pixel paint-alongs that a pixel artist called Lumpy Touch used to do, and they were really fun to follow along and end up with a piece that I was pretty happy with. For this piece, we used the Dawnbringer 32 palette, and for this game mockup, we used the Pico 8 palette. I remembered that they would explain what colors they are using for each step, and because of the restrictions due to the number of colors in a palette, it started to teach me how to use different colors as either shadows or the highlights. So in this example, we use a purple for the shadow of the meteorite, and in the top corner we use a yellow to transition from the greens all the way to white. I don't think I knew the term at the time, but this was basically teaching me how to use hue shifting. Hue shifting is where you transition a color either from the shadow or the highlights by shifting not only the saturation or the brightness, but also the hue of a color. And a common example of this is shifting colors towards yellow for the highlights and towards purples or blues for the shadows. There's a really good video by Brandon James Greer which goes into a lot more depth of how to use hue shifting, and I think that's a really useful resource to start with. There are a ton of really good palettes out there, and the place that I normally go to pick out a palette is on a site called Lowspec. This is what I use for a lot of my university projects, especially this one which was called Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe, which used the Indesga 32 palette. If a palette with this many colors feels a bit too intimidating to start with, then there are a lot smaller palettes that will help you get started instead. Palettes with 4 colors are really common and a really good starting point for this. Working with only 4 colors can be difficult at first, but it helps you practice defining strong shapes and using your values to create a high contrast in your work. With the 4 colors, they don't all have to be with the same hue either. In 2022, I took part in a month-long drawing challenge called Septembit, which is hosted by Saltoons, another wonderful pixel artist, and this was the color palette that we used. Very different to my normal palette, but was a really fun challenge and pushed me to reuse colors in different ways. So the green was not only used for the foliage and the trees, but also as a base color for the water and the lake as well. Working with such a limited palette really pushes you to find creative solutions to your problems, and I think this problem solving is such a big part of pixel art, so it's always good to get some extra practice in for that. Another completely different approach with finding colors that you like to use is to completely omit all of the colors and only work in Greyscale for a bit. This sounds like it completely defeats the point, but hear me out. I used this method when I started to learn how to draw portraits. I was intimidated by the amount of choices I could make, especially with skin tones and hair colors. It all felt like too much on top of learning how to actually draw faces in proportion and at different angles. I was trying to learn too many things all at the same time. Starting with just a Greyscale palette allowed me to focus on only a couple parts of the practice at a time. So at first, I just started to try and understand how to use values and also focus on the different shapes of the face. And then I started to introduce colors in a much more relaxed way. For a few of my portraits, I would choose one color and then use that throughout my piece as sort of an accent color to make it stand out a bit more from my work with just the Greyscale palettes, but not overwhelm me with having super realistic choices of colors initially. Eventually, I've managed to build up enough confidence to choose my own colors, especially with the character that you see here. Breaking down the process into more manageable steps rather than trying to figure out how to draw something along with picking out the right colors helped a lot with just easing myself into the practice and could maybe be a different way to help for you as well. Once I built up some confidence in picking values and just using existing palettes, I started to try and make my own palette by picking a base and adjusting it from there. There are some other really useful websites like Coolers, which help you pick out a small palette for yourself. I actually started with a few colors from here and the colors you see in Posca markers because I really liked the heavy contrast they had between some of the color combinations. It's something that I tried to use in my practice with my 100 daily drawings challenge that I did a couple of years ago. This was a time of a lot of experimentation when it came to using the palette and just playing around with the colors to see what worked and what didn't. I think that a big part of finding your color palette is just giving yourself the time and the space to experiment. I found that now I really enjoy more warmer colors that are a bit more vibrant to what I used to use, and that has been a shift that has just happened over time and experience. When I was practicing drawing a lot of smaller sprites was when I started to make a lot more changes to my palette, because I found that working on smaller canvases helped me experiment in a much more confined space and just get more experiments done in the same amount of time as working on a bigger piece. It sort of forced me to try a lot of different combinations throughout my sprites. These tiny experiments really started to add up and helped me understand how I wanted to reuse a lot of the principles that I was doing when I first started, such as reusing the same colors but for different purposes. Sometimes they could be the base for one sprite, but also the shadows for another. Whenever I felt like I needed to add a new color to the palette, I would normally take the two colors that I thought were the closest to what I wanted, and use the gradient tool to find a middle ground between the two. I try not to do this too much, as I want to have a set of colors that have a good amount of contrast between them. But when I feel like I've exhausted all of my options with what I currently have, then I'll add another color to the palette. I really like the palette that I'm currently using, and it's interesting to see how much it's changed from even just a couple of years ago, and I'm excited to see how much it'll evolve in the next couple of years as well. And that was a quick whistle-stop tour through my works and palettes over the years. I hope some of the tips and approaches to finding a palette that works for you were helpful. And if you want to learn more about specifically color theory, check out this video here, where we start to learn about the different color combinations and their patterns in drawing a landscape piece. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care out there. Goodbye!